let's just start with an update of what exactly is happening at the moment. The ceasefire's been in place since 4 o'clock local time. What's happening?
Well, as far as we can tell, the ceasefire is holding, which, of course, is good news. An awful lot of people got killed in the previous 24 hours because there was a real sharp rise in the air raids. But that seems to be over, at least for the time being. And there have been no rockets fired by Hezbollah down into Israel. And so it's held for about 12 hours, and that's a good sign. It's also notable that many of the nearly 1 million people who are displaced from southern Lebanon have been heading back to their homes very quickly, even though the Israelis have said don't go yet, and their own government has basically advised caution. People seem to be very anxious to get home because they see that as a sign, if not of victory, then of success, that they've withstood the Israeli onslaught. The Israelis, of course, believe that they've achieved a great deal, and they've certainly damaged the leadership of Hezbollah and its command structure. But Hezbollah certainly hasn't gone away, and it's actually slightly surprising when you look at the recent military maps that Israel has not moved huge numbers of troops into southern Lebanon. The numbers are relatively small, and those are going to be withdrawn. So it's certainly very good news that we have a ceasefire. It means we won't be getting people killed and injured, and something like 3,800 people have been killed in the last in the fighting in Lebanon. And I think it's something like 16 or 18,000 have been wounded. So it's been a very bitter war with many civilians dying. For the moment, there's a pause. It's due to last for 60 days. The Israelis have said they will immediately attack if they feel threatened in any way. Hezbollah is ready to fire rockets, but is restraining from doing so. So for the moment, things do look better, at least in Lebanon.
Yeah, I mean, this is we know how complicated and difficult this situation is, but this is just the ceasefire, isn't it, between Israel and Hezbollah, which covers Lebanon and southern Lebanon, doesn't it? It's not an overall ceasefire of what's going on over in that part of the world.
Absolutely not. I mean, Israel has been doing raids in other countries in Syria. Obviously, it's taken action against the Houthis down in Yemen who've been firing missiles at Israel. And, of course, it is massively active, not just in Gaza, where the killing continues with 44,000 people already killed, many missing, and probably about 14,000 or 15,000 of the people killed are children. That continues. Israel is also very active in the occupied West Bank, and there have been over 1,000 deaths of Palestinians there since the current conflict started. So we're very far from an end to that, and the Israelis are absolutely determined to try and destroy Hamas, but they don't seem to be able to do that. I mean, their requirements, what their aims were to really get all the hostages released, well, there are about 100 still held hostage, although the fear is maybe as many as half of those have now died. And they have been able to crush Hamas because you keep on being told that they've done the latest air raid because of a redevelopment of a Hamas unit. So it's not the way that the Israelis wanted, but they can at least say that in Lebanon they've been able to do pretty serious damage to Hezbollah and the leadership, but by no means is that defeated. And it'll probably take 2 or 3 years to recover. But unless we can begin to get a lasting, genuinely peaceful settlement, there will be more war. I think there's no doubt about that.
I mean, for anyone listening, sometimes it can feel confusing, can't it, about who are Hezbollah, who are Hamas, who are players in the West Bank. I mean, just very briefly, if it's possible to, Paul, what is the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas?
Well, Hamas is an internal insurgency against Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip and reached new heights when Hamas amazingly were able to get into Israel. And in the fight that took place then, 1,200 Israelis were killed and about 240, I think it was, taken hostage. Hamas is also strong as a political and paramilitary movement in the occupied West Bank. So that is Hamas. It draws primarily from Sunni Muslims. Hezbollah is essentially, originally it was in reaction to the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon back in the 1980s. And it basically draws from Shia Muslims in southern Lebanon, and it's grown into a major force. It's a political movement as well. It also does a lot of social work, but it is a very effective fighting force. Although obviously it does not have things like anti-aircraft missiles, it's mainly concerned with having rockets which can be fired into Israel. And that is well embedded across much of southern Lebanon. So you don't have separate units and barracks and the rest. These are people living in their own towns and villages who are also paramilitary operatives. So that is the difference. The other thing I think should say is that Hezbollah has extremely close links with Iran and gets a lot of support from Iran.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this Joe Biden has kind of, in a way, brokered this deal, hasn't he? It's one of his last things that he will do in office. I understand Donald Trump has said that he will, as long as the ceasefire lasts, he will keep to this as well. How important do you think is it going to be when the American presidency changes over?
Well, I think that Trump is going to be so unpredictable, and he has so many loyal but inexperienced people being appointed to top jobs that it is very difficult to say what he will do. If he has said that for the moment he's going to allow that ceasefire to continue, so to speak, after the 60 days, that obviously is good news. His attitude to Israel has always been very strongly supportive, which implies that he is not supportive at all of Hamas. And I think this is where people are very fearful that there may be further problems for the Palestinians. In Gaza, where, you have still 2.2, 2.3 million Palestinians, they're not able to get out. The living conditions are absolutely appalling.
I mean, there's been hardly any food in and out, hasn't there? Hardly any supplies.
There's high areas of malnutrition. Almost every person in Gaza has been displaced at least once and sometimes many times. So in humanitarian terms, it's an absolute disaster, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even I was reading somewhere that they think polio's come back into Gaza.
And that is extraordinary. We were so close to getting rid of polio worldwide. It's just a few conflict zones, Afghanistan and a few others where it persists. And now Gaza, which, is appalling, unfortunately.
Absolutely terrible. One other bit of news that's obviously been in recent days was this decision of the International Criminal Court. And I just wondered if we can just comment briefly on that, because, of course, they are seeking arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, but also for a Hamas leader who's since been, everybody's acknowledged, was killed by Israel. So does this help the ceasefire? Does this hinder the ceasefire? Because obviously Netanyahu's saying he doesn't agree with this. The Americans are saying they don't accept this at all from the ICC. Britain's kind of sitting on the fence at the moment. Where does this leave us?
Well, if you look at it in terms of worldwide thing, for the International Criminal Court, which has, I think it's over 130, if not 140 countries have signed up to the Rome Statutes, then that is really quite a serious criticism, a deep criticism of Netanyahu and Gallant, who is his defense minister. The Israelis are taking no notice of it. They say this is just plain anti-Semitism and is entirely unacceptable. But across most of the world, it is accepted that the International Criminal Court is a legitimate court. It's the highest court to take individuals worldwide. You have the Court of Justice, which deals with behavior of states. But this is individuals. And it does mean that, in fact, if Netanyahu was to go to many countries across the world, right across the global south, and indeed many countries in Europe, he will be liable to be arrested. And I think that is a shock. And many people are supportive of Israel, but most people aren't, I think, now. And I think it's done huge damage to itself simply by the number of people that are being killed. The sad thing, the grim thing, I think, is that in some ways Israel may be making itself less secure, because what it is certainly doing is encouraging tens, if not hundreds of thousands of young Palestinians to be opposed to it, to be really bitter. And from there, you will get new people joining the ranks of paramilitary movements over the next 5 to 10 years. And given the huge loss of life, the malnutrition and the rest, I think the impact of this is going to be felt in the Middle East for generations, 30 or 40 years ahead. And in that sense, although Israel may feel more secure at present, I think that is only for the short term. And one is afraid that, in fact, there will be more wars and more fighting unless we can get to grips with the basic thing of peoples who are actually prepared to live together. That is very difficult to see at the present time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Paul, I know every time we speak, it just feels more and more impossible, doesn't it? But we have just got to hope, haven't we? We've got to hope that some way we find a way through on this.
We have indeed, yes, absolutely, Peg.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Paul. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks so much then. Okay, bye-bye.